I'm reading from James Joyce's Dubliners. James Joyce is probably my favorite author because he's quite irreverent and he's usually extremely funny. I'm going to read from the end of the story The Dead, which is at the end of the book. This is basically Christmas Eve. A couple who are together, who are married, but not really together, are going to bed. She's fallen asleep, and Gabriel, is thinking about the evening, what has happened over the evening where his wife had professed her undying love for a young man who had died years and years before, and he's realizing that maybe she's never loved him. Interesting. She was fast asleep. Gabriel, leaning on his elbow, looked for a few minutes unrepentfully on her tangled hair and half-open mouth, listening to her deep-drawn breath. So she had had that romance in her life. A man had died for her sake. It hardly pained him now to think how poor a part her husband, had played in her life. He watched her while she slept as though she had never lived together as a man and a wife. His curious eyes rested long upon her face and on her hair, and as he thought of what she must have been then, in that time of her first girlish beauty, a strange friendly pity for her entered his soul. He did not like to say even to himself that her face was no longer beautiful, but he knew that it was no longer the face for which Michael Fury had braved his death. Perhaps she had not told him all the story. His eyes moved to the chair over which she had thrown some of her clothes. A petticoat string dangled on the floor. One boot stood upright, its limp upper fallen down. Its fellow had laid upon its side. He wondered at this riot of emotions of an hour before. From what had it proceeded? From his aunt's supper, from his own foolish speech, from the wine and dancing, the merry-making when saying good-night in the hall, the pleasure of the walk along the river. Poor Aunt Julia. She too would soon be with the shade of Patrick Morkan and his horse. He caught the haggard look upon her face for a moment when she was singing Arrayed for the Bridal. Soon, perhaps, he would be sitting in that same drawing room, dressed in black, his silk hat on his knees. The blinds would be drawn, and Aunt Kate would be sitting beside him, crying and blowing her nose and telling him how Julie had gone. He would cast about in his mind for some words that might console her, and he would only find lame and useless ones. Yes, this would happen very soon. The air chilled around his shoulders. He stretched himself cautiously under the sheets and lay down beside his wife. One by one, they were all becoming shades. Better pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age. He thought of how she who lay beside him had locked her heart for so many years, that image of her lover's eyes, when he had told her that he did not wish to live. Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that towards himself, towards any woman. But he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in partial darkness he imagined he saw the form of a young man standing under a dripping tree. Other forms were near. His soul had approached that region where dwell the vast hosts of the dead. He was conscious of, but could not apprehend, their wayward and flickering existence. His own identity was fading out into gray, impalpable world. The solid world itself, which these dead had one time reared and lived in, was dissolving and dwindling. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun snowing again. He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling in every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and further westward, softly falling into the dark, mountainous Shannon waves. It was falling, too, upon every part of the lonely churchyard on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, and on the spears of the little gate, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly, as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead.